Welcome to The Pursuit, the self-improvement podcast for those who want to build a life that they can be truly proud of by becoming a better, higher performing version of themselves. And today's episode is going to help you do exactly that. I'm very fortunate to be joined by Cathy MacDonald, a communications expert and former hostage and crisis negotiator. Cathy has been a licensed negotiator for over 20 years, and her experience, well, is going to show in today's episode. She worked for Police Scotland. She then started her own business almost by accident, just for people coming to her through word of mouth to help them grow their businesses by becoming better communicators. So whether it is in your relationship or in business or your career, you want to become more emotionally intelligent, a better communicator, a better listener to improve all those things, then today's episode is going to be great for you. We're going to cover things like why questions are one of the most powerful communication tools. We're going to go over the 5 core emotional concerns, which I loved, which basically explains everything we need to be happy and content as humans. We're also going to go over things like pace, pitch, and tone, and so many things that you can learn to become a better communicator and enhance all the key areas of your life. So if that sounds good to you, then let's jump into the episode. Communication is key is a phrase that's repeated a lot nowadays. I mean, it's gone around for a long period of time. People talk about it with reference to business or relationships, but I don't think many people really understand what communication actually is. So from your perspective as a communications expert and former hostage and crisis negotiator, how would you define what communication is, Cathy?
I mean, we can always go to the dictionary and find that definition, but let's park that. What I would say communication is first of all, it's a skill that needs to be learned and developed and used, and consciously so. But what the reality is communication is just something that evolves, and it starts when we're a little one and we're mimicking our parents and we're learning words, and we find our own way with communication, and we learn to read and write. And the one thing, in fairness, they're beginning to teach it in schools is this listening, all body listening, I think they refer to it as. But at school, if I think back to my time, and anyone listening, if they think back to your time, what were you taught at school about communication? You were more likely to be told to listen and told to sit up straight and put your pencils down and how to write. So we've got the mechanics of it. But if you go back to your question about what do I consider communication to be, it is giving time and space and using the skills you have to communicate a message accurately to someone and to help them receive it in the way it was intended. And it's the same way back the way. It's a mutual exchanging of information, and trying as hard as we can to let it land accurately. Now, that isn't a very concise dictionary definition, but that's more accurate of a description of what I think communication is.
I think that's fantastic, and you summarised it really well there in the sense of when you mentioned it's like it's getting across the point that you want to get across, because it's how many times do we always say that there was a breakdown in communication, and what does that mean? It means that somebody's not got something across in the way that they've wanted to, which obviously will then cause conflict or any of these things. So it makes a lot of sense. When we look at communication, why would you say to the average person listening, why is it so important for them to understand what it is and to actually improve the skill of communication?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. You see reviews saying communication didn't work, or there's too much of it, or not enough of it, or not the right amount of it. And communication actually, it wastes a load of time. We've all, and everyone, I include myself in this, have a situation or have had a situation where we think, oh, we better not mention it because, or we sit on something, but we need to get it off our chest. So we maybe have a bit of a bitching session over the coffee cups about it. And actually, we're creating this miscommunication and assumption wrapped around something. And sometimes, and if you look at work grievances, sometimes things get to the point where we don't even want to speak to each other. And there's grievances where if someone had just invested in a little bit of time and effort at the beginning, would have saved hours, days, weeks of miscommunication and assumptions that once they are sorted out, you can realise that in hindsight, what could we have done differently just to speed up? So what's the importance of communication? Well, it's an essential part of being a human being. It's not as easy as we think, because we've got a whole load of stuff which we will probably touch on that gets in the way, Connor. But if you can think of nothing but effective communication can save us a lot of time. And in business terms, that's time, money, energy. And nobody in this planet has more time to give away than they have. You know, if how many people say that I need an extra 12 hours of my day, or I don't have time to do this, and from your profession, fitness profession, or I don't have time to come into the gym because I've got such and such. The reality is we all have the same amount of time, and we need to dedicate whatever, you know, and prioritize it. Imagine if you could free up time through effective communication. Well, wow, you've just gained yourself, you know, an hour or two extra a day. And sometimes that means that we don't communicate, as in not ignore people, but sometimes we just talk for the sake of talking. You know, yeah. We've again all encountered people who they use 1,000 words when they could use 20. You know, so effective communication can save us a whole lot of time. You know, quiet when we should be quiet, talk when we should talk, and just get our messages conveyed accurately and concisely, and that would be the ticket. So there you go. That's the importance, I would say.
I love that. I think one of the things you'd mentioned there, obviously, this is the valuable thing, isn't it? It's like, what's the most valuable thing we have? It's our time. We can't get more of it. So you're absolutely right. If there's anything that can save us that, we're all looking to buy more of it. But it's like, okay, just communicate better and you'll get more of it and you'll have more of it. And one of the points you mentioned there, I think is so important, that I heard this quote years ago from Jordan Peterson, and he said that conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. In the sense of when somebody puts something off, it's like they should communicate something to them, but what do? They put it off, and they wait and they wait and they wait, and then it blows up. Whenever they have the conversation, it seems to get so much worse, which I think, going to your point, is one of the reasons why it's so important to be good at communicating.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes the thought of having a conversation is actually worse than actually having it. And it's the negative thought about having a conversation that causes the delay. And our brain being the way it does, it supports you in that. It'll find lots of reasons why you shouldn't go have that conversation. And then comes in the human behaviour of we approach the things we like, we avoid the things we don't. And if we keep convincing ourselves that it's going to be awkward to have this conversation, or it's going to be such, we will just avoid it constantly. And I do like that phrase, conflict. It is conflict.
Yeah.
What was it? Tell me that one again.
Conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. Conflict delayed is the conflict. Because in the sense, I remember, I think he was talking about, it's a good one, isn't it? It's brilliant. I think he was talking about, in the sense, specifically even relationships. It's like, if you've got something to tell them and you don't, it's like, and then 6 months goes down the line, like, well, why did you not tell me that 6 months ago? Why did you not tell me that earlier? And then this whole thing just blows out of proportion, which, again, it came back to that point. But you'd mentioned there that we as humans, we struggle to be able to do that. Why is that? If we to go into that kind of human behavior, why do people struggle to communicate things that they know they should, but it's quite uncomfortable and they're kind of hold on to that? Why is that the case?
Because the perception of how do you actually say it. And when I worked with a lot of professions who have models on how to communicate, conflict management model, feedback model, and all these, and they're great. They're little templates that you can use in order to communicate the issue, sort out this, talk about that, and then come up with a solution. But what's missing, and that's probably where our world comes in, is that how do you do it? How do you actually find the words? And how do you make sure that what you're trying to say is received with the best intentions when you feel that there's probably going to be, pushback from the other person? So we avoid it a lot because we may not be practiced at disagreeing. We are practiced at walking away. We're practiced, if you're free to approach the things you like and free to avoid the things that you don't like in life, then it's very easy. But there's always a consequence of either one. And if you think about walking away from a situation, well, that saves you having the conversation, but the consequence is that it grows. Just this conflict, multiplies, as you said. And sometimes people just walk away and just let the consequence run because they don't have the expertise, if you want to call it that, but I'd just say the practice of disagreeing. And that goes right back to childhood, where when we disagree or we don't like, we'll either fight over it or we'll walk away. So I think a big part of it is if you knew the little nuggets, the little stepping stones that would allow you safely to have a conversation that you want to have, then that will probably help greatly. But that's what's missing. And when I finished my career within policing and hostage and crisis negotiation, I had no intention of starting a business in communication. But once I started helping one area with, well, here's how you use here's some of the stepping stones, the little nuggets you can use to actually approach that conversation and have it with the way that you'd really want. Word of mouth, and I end up in a full business, which tells you that there's a gap. There's a gap there for a lot of people. It's not so much I need to have the conversation and here's a model to use. It's how do I do it? How do I say these things without giving the wrong impression? Or, nobody wants to feel awkward. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, try not to feel awkward, but to do that you need skills and sort of practice. So I don't know if that was actually me giving a demonstration of 1,000 words when 20 would work, Connor, but
Yeah, I think it's led us nicely.
Message across.
Yeah, I think it has. I think it's led us nicely onto this in the sense of what can people do if they're facing a decision, if they need to say something, whether it be to a boss or when I think back to my past, there's two conversations that really jump out for me in the sense of I was so nervous to have them based off how the other person would respond. I put it off for ages. And then eventually I seen what I knew was the courage, I suppose, to have those conversations. And when I had those conversations, as another quote I love is from Seneca, he says, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Yep. And then you have the conversation, it's like, okay, well, it wasn't probably as bad as I imagined, but that's easy to say to somebody. So what can people do to have those uncomfortable situations, conversations, the ones that they're shying away from? How would you encourage them to have those conversations?
I mean, there's lots of ways you can approach it, but one, and a phrase that I like, is questions are your friend. So Connor, let's say that you and I had, we were working together and there was one of these odd atmospheres crept up, and maybe I didn't quite understand what had happened, but there's definitely a weird atmosphere, or I feel that I've offended you or something. Well, where's our choice? We can walk away, we can avoid each other. I can make sure that I work at a different time than you. I'll just stop chatting until I think it's calmed down or something. There's an option. But I'd be surprised if it's always one-sided. It's usually both people will know there's a conversation needed. Now, it's not always, but let's go for it that we both picked this up. I would start that by saying, Connor, I feel that I feel something's changed in the last day or two. What's going on? Is there something we need to clear the air about? And make it non-blameworthy. Create the question, because there's a thing I'm definitely going to speak about today called core emotional concerns, and it's basically 5 things that we need as a human being to feel content and happy. And one of these things is autonomy, the feeling that we have freedom, we're not trapped by any means. And in communication terms, the joy of a question is that it doesn't make anybody feel trapped. If I, instead of saying, Connor, is there something we need to talk about? I just said, Connor, there's something we need to talk about and get this cleared. I'm more or less telling you. And for someone who doesn't like to be told what to do, it's like a red rag to a bull. So I think questions are always your friend. And that's one of the tactics that I would use, is just go, is there something going on here that we need to talk about? Have I said something that's hurt? Have I said something that's not landed correctly? And you use these descriptions to, so that you're not assigning blame. The ability to separate the problem, which is our friction, from the people, which is me blaming you or you blaming me. If we can just separate the person from the problem, then that makes it easier to talk about. So if I take the miscommunication between us or the awkwardness between us and make that a thing, can we talk about this awkward atmosphere that has, jumped up and hit me in the face the last day or two? You can see that I'm suddenly talking about a thing rather than, you're grumpy, you're not speaking to me, you've taken something I've said the wrong way. Something like that, as simple as that, coming out with what is a gut reaction because that's the way we feel, is enough to put somebody off. So let's say questions are your friend. Use a question that's not a why did you do that, that's actually quite accusatory, but a question that creates possibilities for discussion. Is there something going on here? Has something happened that's changed the way that we work with each other? I'm just wondering because I feel there's an awkward atmosphere. What's your take on it? And that's a lovely catalyst to start opening up a question or opening up a conversation. So if that's any help to anyone, I give you my blessing with that.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So we question the situation rather than questioning the person as such. We don't. as you said, we don't label them as, you know, like, oh, you're being weird. Why are you being quiet? Like, because as soon as we do that, as you said, that creates that friction and gets them on the back foot.
There's
Yeah.
I message and you message. You messages should always be positive. Okay, so you are a great colleague. You know, together we work hard. You always bring good energy. I message is when you need to bring the negative element into it. I get the feeling something's happened in the last day or two, Connor. I just feel there's this atmosphere and I don't know what's going on. What's your take on it? Now, you might turn around and say, well, a lot of rubbish, I've never noticed anything. But it allows me to say, well, I felt this. But if you're telling me that everything's good, fine. You know, the ball's then in the other person's court and they know that you know, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's fantastic. It makes a lot of sense. And you know, the place it puts me as well is like one of my business partners. He's so good at this. When it's we always speak about, especially in business with the three of us that run the business, we talk about the aspect of over communicating, and it's something we try to hold up. Now, we're not always perfect at it. I think it's a very difficult thing to be really good at, but we do our best to over communicate. And one of the core components of that is anytime something does feel off or some person feels that, as we bring it up. However, exactly as you said, the way that we approach that's so important. He's very good at bringing it around the situation and bringing that to attention and saying, listen, like, something feels, at least from my perspective, feels a bit off. Do you feel the same way, or is there anything going on in your mind? How are you feeling? And then that just opens the floodgates, and then I feel more comfortable to then be like, right, okay, whereas if he came to me and said, you're being weird to me, what's happening, I would be more defensive, and I'd probably even hold it to myself even more. So I think it's a great kind of tool for everybody to use in that. When it comes to conflict and we see a conversation being potentially a difficult conversation, one that's going to be, maybe the person's not going to take to it too well, what is a way that we can communicate with someone to reduce, well, I suppose the goal is to try and make the situation not go out of hand. Is there any way that we can communicate in a way that helps with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can reframe it for a start. What you've said is conflict and a difficult conversation. Now, remember the approach and avoid. Are these words that warm to us, that make us want to approach someone, or are they words that are a bit cold and make us want to walk away? You know,
they make us want to walk away, for sure.
Yeah, so being able to use language that is more approach. So I would use an honest conversation rather than a difficult one. It'd be good if we could just speak openly, honestly, and have a conversation that helps us get back on track. And I'm wondering if, how to go about that. What's your take on it? Is far better than, I know it's really difficult, but it's important that we talk about this conversation, and this, to avoid conflict. They're sort of words that are more negative and push you away. So try reframe things into, not fake. You don't want to make this pink and fluffy. We're not living in unicorns with rainbows. This is just finding stuff that fits into the human psyche, which is, there's this things come up, and you might even want to say, well, it could be considered difficult. I actually think it's more having an open and honest discussion about it. Normalizing conversations that could be viewed as difficult is helpful. That's an investment. And I really love what you and your partners are doing, Connor. You're ahead of the game there. You all have almost, as partners, created a rule, or a guidance for communication, the same as you would for any other skill set within your business. And any business people who are listening just now, have a think about it. Do you have a model that you use for communication? Do you have a few guidance that basically says, when this happens, here's how we're going to deal with it? And if you don't, it's actually worth its weight in gold. And without prying into your business, Connor, has that served you well, the three of you?
Incredibly well. I mean, it's something that I wasn't aware of it. Obviously, I'd been very aware of communication and improving it. But when I came into the business, the two of my business partners were already in it. They brought me in, and it was one of the first things they said to me. I remember literally sitting at a dinner with Lawrence, one of my business partners, and he said to me, he was like, listen, any time that you feel the need to say something, one of the worst things that we can do, and it's very easy to do, is hold it in. So we really value something that we call over communication, which as soon as he said it, I kind of knew what it would mean. You can assume what it means. But he
Mhm.
explained it to me. He's like, I would rather that you over communicate how you feel about something rather than you under communicate and then we build resentment over time. Because
Sure.
especially in business and any form of relationship, I suppose, whether it's a romantic relationship or in business, one of
Yep.
the most dangerous things that we can build is resentment, and over
Mhm.
communicating helps us kind of, it adds in a blocker to that, so we're not building resentment over time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you've definitely got a good model, a good platform to build
Mhm.
other conversations on if you have that guidance to start with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, when we look at communication, obviously there's a lot of things that you've taught over the years.
Mhm.
Um, I would love to go back into just your career for a little bit though, and ask,
Okay.
because we all hear of like hostage and crisis negotiator. It's a big phrase, and we've all heard of that, and we've
It
maybe
is.
seen it on the internet, especially in America. It's very Americanized and things like that. But could you give us a bit of an insight as to what you done in that role and why communication was so important, and yeah, what that
Yeah.
looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I was a police officer for a full career of over 30 years, and really, you become a negotiator pretty quickly. But in terms of formal negotiation skills and training, that was 2004, formally trained. And um, as a licensed negotiator, you are brought into incidents. When an incident happens in the police, you have a commander in charge, and they will say, right, here's the situation that I need to resolve. How do I do that? And they have at their disposal various specialisms. And you can imagine a firearms incident. They would bring in firearms people, they maybe bring in officers with dogs, they'd have intelligence working, they'd have a whole load of things without giving away tactics and stuff here. I mean, you'll see more on the telly, to be honest, than that. But you get the idea where one person has responsibility for running this. Negotiators were the only non-tactical option a commander had, which means that all we have is our voice, our ability to listen, our understanding of human behaviour, and putting all of that together, we try and talk people down, we listen to understand, we act as that sort of link between the commander and the front line. So everything to do with communication, that's our bag, and we can advise on it and we can deliver on it. So
Hmm.
that, because having a conversation is the lowest risk possible, and there's not a commander anywhere who wouldn't prefer a low risk option. And if you can talk somebody to put a gun down, for example, or you can talk someone back from an edge, that's far better than tactically having to pull them or force them to do stuff. And the skills that we have, it's not that you're being sneaky or getting into somebody's brain at all. It is actually you're conveying a message in a way that they get it and they
Yeah.
understand it. And yeah, and that's what we're working at, to try and reduce the tension, reduce the risk, and talk people around if you want. You'll never ever, sometimes I'm asked, how do you persuade somebody to do XYZ? What are the little ninja mind tricks? I'll say, well,
Mhm.
you can never ever make someone change their mind, ever. All you can do is present stuff in a way that's familiar to them and let them mull it over, and they will change their own mind. So we never
Mhm.
change people's minds, they change their own mind, but we help them along the way by presenting things in a different way than maybe they're used to, but still through a lens that they're familiar with.
Yeah, it gives it a look, because one of the key things I picked out from that is when we talk about negotiators and persuasion, especially in the self-improvement and self-help space, we look at, there's Robert Cialdini, who I'm a big fan of in terms of his book
Yeah.
Influence is fantastic. But you've got also like the 48 Laws of Power and Robert Greene, and people always think, oh well, you can, what exactly like you said, what is the question that I can ask to totally change somebody's mind? But the
Mm.
important point you mentioned there is that's not what we're doing. It's our job to make them feel heard, understood, respected, and make them feel that, like, put them in a situation where the context is what they need. We're giving them the right context to then make the decision for themselves, which
Yep.
may or may not be obviously what we want. We're persuading them in that kind of
Yeah.
direction. But I think that's a really good way to explain what you do. One thing I'd be curious of is, what's an example of maybe a job that you were on in the past You'd mentioned obviously like crisis negotiation, which I assume would be, could be suicide, talking somebody away from that. The crisis. What's an example of a crisis or a situation that you've had to intervene with before and use communication to change that?
There are many. Crisis negotiation is one where you can almost imagine it as an emergency. Somebody didn't really intend to be in this situation, but suddenly they are, and they are in personal crisis. And as human beings, we all have coping mechanisms. We have ways of, when we get into something that isn't the best for us, we have ways of getting out. And that's emotionally as well as practically. But if our normal coping mechanisms no longer serve us well, or we're suddenly in a situation that is, above our abilities, we can go into personal crisis. And crisis negotiators help people come out of that crisis situation so that they can think and see a little bit clearer and find the right path for them. So crisis negotiation can be anything. You mentioned suicide intervention, and to be honest, that was more than half of our work, was people in personal crisis who, in the main, didn't want to end their life, but felt that that was a solution to the problems they were experiencing. And it's, some of the most heartwarming and I'm trying to think of the best word to say this, because I don't want to say it's joyous, but when you persuade someone to come back from the edge, there's relief, there's joy, there's fear, all of that wrapped up within it. We're human beings, and that's what, although we've got skills to fall back on, you still have a feeling and you invest in someone. So when you're able to help someone in that situation find a different route, it's such a good feeling. And of course, communication through emotion, and that's the big thing. Crisis negotiation is working your way through an emotional jungle. There's just this load of emotion that, when we're highly emotional, our normal way of communicating is blocked a little bit. And if anybody thinks of a time where they really had an emotional vent, a good old rant where, and another thing came out, all that sort of stuff, and they think back to it, their pace, pitch and tone and how they talked changed, their word choice changed. The ability of their logical brain to come through was really, really limited. It was all emotional led. We make quick decisions on emotion that don't always serve us well. Our ears don't work as well. So we're not likely to listen to someone when we're highly emotional. So when we're in crisis negotiation, the main part that we need to work through right at an early stage is the emotion. And if we can reduce the tension, reduce the emotion in someone, then I speak about a little emotional seesaw. When their emotion is up here, being able to communicate effectively both ways doesn't work. We have to get it back to this sort of level. And when we're there, that's got the best opportunity for communication to flow back and forward. So we have to manage the emotion of the situation. Take that out of my world, take it into your world, take it into family relationships, take it into business relationships, take it into coach and client relationships. There will always be moments where emotion leads the way, and unless that emotion can be managed, you won't get an effective conversation working. So crisis negotiation is a big bit of dealing with emotion first. And when it comes to hostage negotiation, or ones that are maybe more along the lines of extortion and things that have been pre-planned and are pretty organised, then we need a different approach. There will be emotional bits within that, but that's what we would call instrumental. Someone is manipulative, or they have a lever over something and they have thought something through, and there's a bit more we used to speak about moving the cognitive furniture about. There's far more requirement for that when you're dealing with someone, particularly when you can't trust them, when they're other than being honest. It's two different things. So I've not given you one specific example, but I hope these two differences sort of convey the difference, and then transfer it into your world as well, Connor, which is the importance of today. Being able to say, well, it's okay hearing about this, but how do we use it?
One of the things that you'd said there, which stands out to me, I actually remember, Cathy, you'd said this, and I remember you saying this to me, and this would have been, 5-6 years ago now.
Wow.
That when when emotion is high, communication becomes ineffective. And this whole idea that you just spoke about there, that was a light bulb moment for me in my
Okay.
life, because then as soon as I heard that, I was thinking, right, okay, well, when is the situation that I can think back to when I was when emotion was high? Maybe I was angry, maybe I was
Hmm.
happy, and I said something that I probably shouldn't have. I made this promise that I probably shouldn't have at the time, and it's always stuck with me that anytime I'm communicating, whatever it happens to be, I'm always checking, like, okay, how do I feel? What are my emotions right now? So I would love to know more about that, in the sense of, talk to us about emotion and how does that come into things with regards to communication?
Well, I mean, we're human beings, we have emotion. And I know that we're all wired differently, and some people are far more emotional than other people. And you'll have some folk who are very factual and can speak in facts and figures and things and don't really show their emotion that much. We're all a mix of different levels of emotion, if you want. But generally, it is always there in some form. Some people internalize it, which isn't, some people will shout and swear, and you will be well aware that you're having a hairdryer moment. You'll be well aware of how they feel. But other people internalize it and they become incredibly silent, and it's, deep inside them. It doesn't mean that the emotion is any more less intense or less meaningful or obstructive in terms of effective communication. It just means it's not as obvious. So, emotionally, it's important to pick up that there is emotion in other people and ourselves.
Mm.
If the purpose of you and I speaking is to have a conversation, Connor, and one or both of us is emotional, then actually we've got a job to do to let that emotion drop, first of all. And there's little ways you can do that, which is just identifying it in each other. And I might say something like, Connor, I can see, this matters to you a whole load. That's quite clear. We need to, or if we're going to speak about this, we need to find a bit of space where we can do this calmly rather than yelling at each other.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the most eloquent way of putting that across, but your question about how important is emotion, how does it impact on us, and communication, is that it's massive, and we've all got it.
Mm.
We're human beings. So to ignore emotion within communication, you're missing a trick. Imagine
Mm.
if you're really, really angry at me and I still go ahead and tell you all the things I want to tell you. Then there's another quote about the trouble with communication is that we think it's always happened when it's not. I will go away believing that I have said my piece, but the reality is, because you're so emotional, you don't hear the words. It's not that you don't hear anything. You will hear proportionately. If you're in the red mist part about to explode, you won't hear much of what I say at all. But that seesaw is incremental. And if you're a little bit angry with me, you will hear some words, but you won't hear the whole story. You'll hear bits of them, and you will take that and you will put that into a sense that works for you, which might not actually be my real intention.
Yeah.
So, emotion can get in the way if we don't manage it effectively. So, be aware of it, I think, is the first thing, and then think about managing it as the second one.
Yeah, that frame you'd gave there, I think, is such a great one. I can't remember precisely what you said, but it's something along the, like, I can see this means a lot to you. Because what do most people say is, oh, I can see how angry you are, or I can see how there's that negative connotation. Whereas the way you'd said it was like, I can see this is important to you. How did that come into that conversation? What was the word
Well,
you used?
um, if you're yelling and screaming at me, it's obvious to every man and beast around me that you're angry, pissed off, whatever you want to call it. And for me to say, I can tell you're angry and, pissed off, is a little bit patronizing because it's so obvious. So I more factualize it. And this is very good when you're dealing
Mm.
with men or you're dealing with people who are factual speakers, is to turn it into a fact. I can see that this troubles you, or it's quite clear to me that this, that you believe strongly in what you're speaking about. And it's a
Mm.
factual way of conveying that you've picked up the emotion. Now, it won't work with everybody. Some people will like you to mention the emotion. And if I didn't know, for example, you went quiet, say you're internalizing that emotion, instead of saying, I can tell you're a bit angry about it, I might just ask. Rather, I'd label the emotion through a question, just say, look, Something's changed. Are you angry with me over this? And it's fair to ask that because you've gone quiet, but I can't tell what the emotion is. Some people it's dead easy, in which case don't patronise them. Just react and say, this matters to you. I can see that. Even a simple line going, that matters to you. You've labelled the emotion in a factual way, which is saying, I'm not ignoring how you feel. I'm acknowledging it, but it's done in a way that's not patronising. When I was a young negotiator, actually, this is how things changed. When I was a young negotiator just learning, they did say you had to label the emotion, which meant labelling the emotion that you saw. And I remember thinking, this feels a little bit fake or false. It's like, I can see you're angry. I can see you're happy now. Use normal language, and language that's a connector rather than a pusher aware, if that's even a phrase. But I like these little factual phrases. This clearly matters to you. I can see how much how important it is, as factual ways of conveying emotion, and it's a very safe way. If they come back with lots of emotional language, you know that you're dealing with an emotional person. But somebody who speaks on factual grounds, you're safer to use factual language.
Which is a great thing to realise. One of the things that me and my girlfriend, she is, which we've touched on, kind of emotional intelligence a little bit here, and I'm sure we'll go into it more, but she is probably the most emotionally intelligent woman I've ever met. Like the way that she understands her emotions, seeks to understand mine, is something that I'd never experienced before, which is one of the reasons that initially attracted me to her so much was that aspect of her. And one of the big differences that we've realized is that I am very logical, as men often are, and it's the idea that both men and women communicate very differently. Now, obviously there's differences. Some men and some women are different. I'm kind of generalizing here, but when we look at it, like, I am quite factual. I would rather sort something out, tell me the facts, and I will deal with it. Like, even when you labeled it that way, like, I felt understood there. I like that. Whereas for her, like, she wants to feel heard. And for I think especially for men, that can be very challenging to make their partner feel heard, to make them feel like really understood and listened to. Because, you know, we hear this phrase a lot when people are like, listen to me and hear me. And there seems to be a bit of a difference there. How would you describe that, especially from a male standpoint, making somebody feel genuinely heard, like and understood? How can we go about that?
I used to think about it as factual and emotional. And if a factual speaker and an emotional speaker get together, it's sometimes like Swahili meets Russian. You know, they don't quite get each other because they're not speaking the same language. So it's lovely again. Connor, I hope that you realise how talented you are in this. And that was really quite clear from the first time we ever met, when you came onto one of the courses. And it's really lovely to know that your partner actually is a communicator as well. That'll be a lovely combination for you to be able to talk things through. But actually, if you feel that you're a factual speaker and you're going to speak to someone, you think, oh, it's just going to be tears and snot and feelings, and that puts you off a bit because it can be awkward. Factual speakers don't like what they perceive as pink and fluffy, and I don't want to get all pink and fluffy. Well, you don't have to, but what you can say is, look, I get that you're upset at this. I'm trying to work this out, but help me. I'm factual. I know I want to problem solve, but you tell me what I need to do right now to help you. And if the answer is just listen, then listen. Listen for 3 things. Listen for the facts. That's times, dates, places. Factual speakers will catch them beautifully. Okay? Listen for clues about emotion. Now, it might be verbal to say, I'm hurt by that. I'm angry over that. They're really, really obvious. But it could be that somebody is simply in tears, or they're frustrated. Their body language is telling you. You can pick up the emotion. You listen for emotion through other than your ears. You're picking up all the clues. So far, you pick up the facts, pick up the emotion and what it is. And the last part, and we've not even touched on this yet, are the clues that tell you what this is really about. That is, there will always be clues underneath the layer about what is this about. And really will have conflicted with something that they value, they believe in, they need, or they want. And there will be clues about that. And if we can learn to listen for these clues, then that's your listening. What do you listen for? And because somebody say, well, I'm listening, but, well, are you? And it's like, if I ask you to go in a shop and just buy me stuff, you'll be, oh God, what am I going to buy? I hope that's right. But if I say, can you go into the shop and buy me a fruit juice? I better keep it healthy. A fruit juice, an apple, and a salad. Then you know what you're looking for. And as soon as you go in that shop, you'll go, and there's this, this, and this. Listening is the same. If you browse listen, you might pick up the right stuff, but you might not. If you listen knowing what to listen for, which is the three things of information, facts, emotion, and the clues that tell you how this person ticks, the things that are really important to them, then you are listening for a whole load of stuff that you can then use effectively to connect, to understand, and actually takes a step forward later on into how you persuade and influence. But there we go.
I think this is brilliant, because that's what you just described there. That's an effective communicator, isn't it? Somebody that really seeks to understand. I think I can't remember you'd opened with this, and like in the sense of thinking back to school and communication. I certainly can't ever remember them teaching us that. But if they did, at least when I left school, my idea of communication was me communicating to others, like what I said, how I said it, my tone, and all those things. And of course, that's an aspect of it. But I never once took into consideration how I heard other people, how I understood people. Like how do you do that? And I think those three things that you just listed there are great points for people to look at, in the sense of when they're communicating with a partner or in any form of relationship or friendship. Those are the things that you should be looking for. And in your way to describe it, would that be what you would look for to make someone feel truly heard? Why would we look for that?
We all want to be, and you mentioned it earlier, heard, understood, respected. That's it. Well, how do we do that? And going back, sometimes, and a good one, my husband is brilliant at this now. He needed a few years. And he'll say, okay, I'm hearing you. What do you need? Do you want me to solve it with you, or do you just want me to listen? You know, and that's helpful for him, because he can't second guess. He couldn't second guess what I was needing. I'm going, I just need you to do this. Well, tell me then. I shouldn't need to tell you, but you do. You know, and the reality is we are all unique people who see the world and experience the world through our own unique lens. And it's selfish for me to expect him to understand how to listen to me if he's never ever done that before. So the poor boy, I mean, we've been together for 40 years now, so he's there. Yeah. But I think I'm so impressed, because he's going, look, I don't get it, but I want to help, so you tell me what you need. From that, do I feel heard, understood, respected? Absolutely. Now what I need him to do is to listen to the stuff I say, pick up how I feel about it, and get what really is under the surface. So, and it doesn't have to be long and complicated. You can do this just in a few seconds, just by capturing the key. But if you, I go back to the fact, if you do not know what you're listening for, how on earth can you be a good listener? Yeah. And if you've never thought about how you listen before, don't try and do all these three things at once. Purposely have a conversation and just say to your partner, look, there's conversation cards that you can get, you know, and they can be quite good fun, because they'll say, right, what's your first childhood memory? And somebody will just start talking. We need that to practice. So get one of your friends or your partner just to say, look, I need to practice at listening for different stuff. Would you mind just chatting? But you need to give them a springboard to chat about. So these conversation cards are quite nice to do it. And then think, okay, just now I'm just going to listen for the facts. Or this time I'm going to listen for how they feel about it. And the next time I'm going to listen for the other stuff, the clues that tell us how they tick. And if you can have a little practice at that, it's incredible how lovely these conversations turn out. And I go back to the fact that we don't often spend enough time with each other communicate. I don't think I've actually said that today, but I don't think we have enough time just having conversations with each other and enjoying the human connection, particularly in the world of these little things, you know, mobile phones and technology, where most of our communication is via that route. I do fear that we are going to lose the human connection through communication, and then it'll just become so messed up.
How can we, specifically with our partner, how can we bring that connection back in this world of, you know, mobile phones, distractions? We've all got, you know, jobs, careers, businesses. How can we make sure that we're prioritizing that connection with our partners? How can we do that?
I suppose, you need to want to, first of all, and recognise that there's value in it. Because if you don't want to and you don't see the value in it, you're never ever going to do it. Um, things like making time for each other. I know there's a group of friends that I have, and if we go out to dinner, the phones are put away. Um, there was a thing that one of them suggested at one point, we just put the phones in the middle of the table, and the first person to go to the phone has to pay the bill.
That's
Quite like
a great
that
one.
actually, because I thought, right, I'm going to resist. But having little rules of, as you would do, a lot of kids have rules that there's no screen time after a set time at night or whatever. And we personally have a rule, we don't do mobile devices while we're having our meal and things. So I think things like that. But before you can even come up with that agreement, it's essential that to recognise that there's value in it. And if you don't see the value, it's not going to work. But yeah, I hope most people would want to keep or retain or increase that human connection, and it's just a matter of having a conversation about it and creating something that works for you, for everybody in that relationship.
Yeah, which I hope people get from today, because this is that. It's like when people hear of communication, and communication is key. Everybody somewhat knows that, but they don't truly understand that. They don't truly understand. It's like, you want to have a better relationship with your partner, that you need to be on an emotional level, you need to feel connection with that person. The only way to feel some level of depth in terms of emotional connection is through communication, whether that be, again, like, well, I'm sure we'll go into this, verbal communication or other forms of communication, but that's absolutely it. And as you said, that's dying off now. That's some of the things me and my girlfriend, that and it's hard that me being this self-improvement guy, she was the one that came to me and said, I think an idea I've had, I think it would be great if we don't use our phones when we're eating meals together. How does that sound? And I was like, amazing, that's so good. And I'm a big fan of that, in terms of making standards for our lives and almost rules, because people shy away from rules, thinking that rules kind of remove freedom, but they actually bring it into your life. You're going to gain more freedom and more enjoyment and fulfillment from life from having set rules that allow you to connect with people and do all these things. So I think those are really good points. And with communication, and obviously in connection as such, the points that we mentioned, and again, this is one of the things I took away from you years ago, was heard, understood, respected. We obviously just touched on that there, but I just want to go back to that to really hammer in the importance of that. Why is it important to make people feel those three things: heard, understood, and respected?
Because it creates calm and balance, and it's got the best opportunity for communication to flow effectively between all the parties if there's that feeling of respect. If you go into a meeting and you know that you're not going to be heard, you're going to be talked over, you can imagine how that makes you feel. Understood, you might get 5 minutes to say your piece, but unless somebody demonstrates that they understand where you're coming from, you've maybe just said something and there's silence. You need that feedback that you've been understood and respected. That goes without saying, that you're made to feel welcome, and what you have to say. Not everyone may agree with it, but they respect the fact that that's where you're coming from. So when you create an environment where everybody has that feeling, it doesn't mean that you can't have heated discussions or important discussions about things. We have to be able to disagree with each other. It's human. It's a human requirement. 8 billion people on this planet, all in their own unique bubble. It's ridiculous to think that we all need to agree with each other. And this is where you've mentioned conflict a couple of times, and I would separate the word conflict from disagreement, simply because conflict brings up this idea of fighting. But I'm not saying that it's just your understanding of the word. Some people use disagreement as, the word conflict to reflect disagreement, but let's separate what they are. Most people will avoid conflict because it involves fighting and that awkward feeling. As human beings, we have to be able to disagree with each other, and to be able to disagree with dignity comes around when we listen to each other, and we listen with interest and curiosity rather than judgment and trying to jump in and say, well, that's rubbish because here's my take on it. So the importance of feeling heard, understood, respected, it allows communication to flow. It comes in different shapes and forms, but the big thing is, when you need to discuss something that you disagree on, that's the platform to use. It's not if you go into what I would call conflict, which is fighting, and that's a choice. If you get somebody who wants to fight over something, Well, the chances are they always get what they want when they fight, which is probably people walking away from them. Why do people say what they say and do what they do? Because they can and because it works. So if I am uber aggressive and uber strong and I talk over everybody and I always get my way, why on earth should I change that strategy? So until it doesn't work for me, I will keep being this overbearing, horrible person. So how can you create an environment that says that's unacceptable because it's not working? We can only get communication one way. So doing something about that is very helpful. So
It's a great point. I've experienced this a lot before, and it's a really good point. I've actually just realized that when some people, it's in there again, probably from their upbringing, their experience, their only experience is I need to create conflict to get what I want. And as you said, it's like obviously we know through communication and emotional intelligence that that is a very poor way about going about it. But it is showing people that obviously there are other ways to get around it. There are better ways to get around it and communicate and handle that with people. I couldn't help as well when you were talking there. I couldn't help but again bring it back to thinking about my girlfriend. One of the things that she does incredibly well is when she communicates with me and there's any form of whatever it is that we're discussing, she has an incredible ability to not make me feel judged. Because as you said, it's like anytime I feel judged, whether that's in business, by the way, and I'm talking with my business partners or a client even, or if I'm talking to a client and somebody feels judged, what happens, especially I find in my experience for men, your ego comes in and you're like, whoa, hold on a minute here, who are you to judge me? And that, I think, even just really nailing in on that, to not make somebody feel judged when communicating with them is such a key aspect of being able to connect with them. Would you agree?
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we'll say something without the intention of it being judged, but you get a defensive reaction. And as soon as you can say, look, sorry, I think that came across in the wrong way. I don't mean to judge. I'm trying to understand it, but my words were a bit of a mess. So apologies. Talk me through that. Help me understand it from your perspective. Then that is that is you listening in the moment, not being away, your brain elsewhere, but in the moment, so you can recover and rescue stuff. Connor, if you and I know we were going to try and do this as a face-to-face podcast, because that's always the best communication, is in the moment, even if we were face-to-face right now, we would unintentionally miscommunicate. Not because we want to, but just because you're in your bubble and I'm in mine, and I make sense of the world in my way, you make sense of the world in yours. I would hope that the way that we communicate is as best we can. But that's why when you're having a conversation with someone, the sender, message, receiver, what you say and how you say it, you have an intention behind it. But it could be how they feel that day, it could be your pace, pitch and tone, it could be the way that you've looked. It maybe lands in a different way than you intended it to be. And their reaction will tell you if that's the case. And as soon as you can, you repair it. You don't let it fester. You don't let it go on to something else. And they'll say, I'll say something, I'll say, are you trying to say I'm lazy? That is not what I said. And if that's how it's come across, I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say is this. Well, how can I say it differently? Tell me how to say this differently if you feel that what I'm doing is just constantly criticising you. That's not my intention. Now, you'll get people who will manipulate that because they want to be the victim or they want to think bad of you. And it's good when you can turn that around to say, if you think that way, that's your choice. It's not because I've said anything untoward. And be very clear about your intentions behind what you're saying. If you're dealing with somebody who is a little bit more difficult and you think will manipulate what you say.
That's a fantastic way that people can take from this, as well as the to very quickly come in and say, oh, listen, I apologize, I didn't mean for it to come across this way. What I'm trying to get across is this, but could you help me like better understand the way you're feeling, or whatever it is. That's such a key thing, which I've noticed myself getting better at, but sometimes I don't do enough of, is coming in very quickly to, if somebody's misinterpreted something, then okay, let's make that clear. Oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean for that to come across that way. What I'm trying to say is, or whatever it happens to be. It's a really useful tool to approach it that way.
Sorry, thank you, please. 3 magic keys.
Sorry,
I'm
thank
sorry.
you, please.
Thank you, please. And it sounds ridiculous. It's the things you teach a little child to say, but actually we begin to forget them as we get older, particularly if we're in one of these tickly conversations. So they will diffuse and help in so many ways.
So how do we use that? Is that just literally remembering those words and to use sorry, thank you, please while we're communicating, especially when we think that something might be misinterpreted? How do we utilize that?
Oh, the sorry is if there's a misinterpretation, like, I'm sorry, that's not my intention. You'll get people who say sorry all the time when there's nothing to be sorry about, and that's actually quite infuriating. So they have to be well placed, they have to be meaningful, they're not just thrown in anywhere. But if we're having say we've had a conversation over, bring back the one that we were going to have where there was a little bit of an atmosphere about us, and we, I'm saying, like, has something happened? And we chat through it all and we discuss that we realise that I did something that you'd interpreted one way, we get it all sorted out and just say, look, thanks, that was helpful, just having that conversation. That thank you is massively important, and it builds into another one of these core emotional concerns, which is the appreciation. We need to feel valued and appreciated, and one way to do that is verbal, which is thank you, thanks for listening to me, thanks for having that conversation, that wasn't the easiest one for us to have, or well, did we just have an argument? Well, thanks for sticking with it and seeing it through. It's really important to say thank you, and please, can we talk through this? It's got to be well placed and natural and real. It just can't be words thrown in anywhere to fulfill that sort of phrase.
Talk to me about those core emotional concerns. What are core emotional concerns, and how do they impact communication and all of these things?
Okay, these things are golden nuggets. In negotiation, and this is way back in the 80s, which will seem like ancient history to many, Roger Fisher and Dan Shapiro were tasked with, at Harvard, looking at why do some negotiations work better than others. Okay. And basically what they came up with, and this is my paraphrasing and summarising of it, is that they said, well, the ones that consider how people feel are the ones that are more successful. The ones that are transactional and simply deal on the facts and figures are less successful. And their findings basically said that every human being on this planet, and that's currently 8 billion of them, every human being on this planet needs 5 things to feel content and happy. And when we're content and happy, we're at one with the world. It's great. And when these 5 things are called core emotional concerns, when they're compromised, that's when our emotion changes to the more negative. Now, core emotional concerns are so powerful that we gravitate towards people and environments that help us fulfill our core emotional concerns. And I speak about it filling your buckets. When our core emotional concern buckets are full, that's where we want to be. That's where we're happiest. And if everybody listening just now can think of their happy place, where they've not a care in the world, they're the most happy, and they think of, well, who are they with? What are they doing? What's the environment? Well, that's you got your buckets full. And you can tell how much you would invest your time, your effort, your energy, your money to fulfill that. Now think of the worst environment that you never want to be in again. You dislike the environment, dislike the people, you couldn't wait to leave the job, for example, or whatever else. Well, that's an example where your core emotional concerns are empty, are not being fulfilled. And you can tell, and I'm going to go on the specifics just now of what these are, but you can tell that if you've ever left a job, not so much because the work wasn't good, but you didn't like the people, the culture, the environment, or anything else, then you can tell how strongly that affected you to the point where you left. Or you might be trapped in a job where, maybe the terms and conditions are holding you there, but you can tell how miserable you are. Then your core emotional concerns have been compromised. And this goes for everything, every area of life, whether it's social, whether it's work, whether it's business. If we can be as content as we can be, then we will look forward to going there. Just think, anyone who's listening that has a skip in their step and they look forward to going to work and they give this discretionary effort, they will do far more than they're ever paid to do simply because they have a love for the team that they're working with. You can be guaranteed the buckets are full. So let's have a look at what these buckets are. Well, I'm saying a look. I'm going to talk through them. So number 1 is appreciation. We all need to know that we are valued for what we do and it's recognised by those we expect. And that can be as simple as a thank you. It can be service. I'll buy you a coffee because you've had a busy day, and that you will feel so appreciated if suddenly this little cappuccino arrives and you've had a crazy morning. So a random act of service. Part of appreciation is time, respecting somebody's time and making good use of it. And anyone who's ever felt that they've had their time wasted will know that their emotion goes from content and happy to a bit frustrated. That is that is one of your appreciation. The bucket's been compromised. So that's just 3 examples of it. But basically, feel appreciated. Now, it's important to highlight that core emotional concerns are a human need. This isn't just a nice to have. These are so strong that it's a human need in us. And that need means that we remember, gravitate towards and go away from, again, that approach and avoid. So that's number 1. Before I go through all 5 of them, Connor, I think it's good to have a little gap between them, and you can, if you've got any questions specifically about the appreciation side of it or core emotional concerns per se.
Absolutely. I think that key point there you'd mentioned was that, and what we'll probably do is we'll probably, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we will gravitate more towards the people that make us feel all of those things. Like, for example, like as you just said, the appreciation. If somebody makes you feel appreciated, well, whether that be just somebody you work with or in a romantic relationship, you're going to want to be around them more because they meet, as you said, your core emotional concerns. So I think it's really good just to iterate that again, like the importance of this. This is what we should be striving for in terms of anybody, whether it is a romantic relationship or with somebody in business or the people we work with. If we really look at these core emotional concerns and make them feel that way, then they're going to want to be around us more, and that's a really positive way to influence and persuade people to some degree. But appreciation, I think, is a huge one, and I'm sure we can maybe go into this after it. But there's this idea, a guy, Gary Chapman, I'm not sure if you're aware, the 5 love languages that he made up, and one of them, yeah, absolutely, and it kind of comes around this. So I'd be really curious, and I'm sure we can go into all of this. But yeah, appreciation, I think, is so key, as you said.
Yeah. Appreciation is the 5 love language. That's, if you take that, then it is. What I would say is there's a couple of them that are absolutely safe for everybody that you meet. So time and verbal. It doesn't matter who you meet where, in business, socially, at work. If you use these 2, then that will fulfill appreciation. Acts of kindness, random acts of service, like buying your coffee or something, would be quite good. But I might actually overstep the mark and I'll start cleaning out your desk and filing your stuff. And that actually then maybe jars with the autonomy side of it. So you need to know the person. A little random act of kindness always goes a long way. But if it's anything bigger than that, it needs to be considered. And the other one is gifts. Some people like gifts, some people don't. Because a gift, if I said to you, thank you for all your work, Connor, I really appreciate everything that you're doing here, but I think it needs more than just me saying thank you, and here's a little picnic basket for you and your girlfriend to take a morning off and just go and have a picnic together. That would maybe be proportionate and make you feel good because you've worked for me. But actually, if you've just joined the company and you don't know anybody, it might be great, but it might actually be a bit overwhelming, because what happens now is you feel that you're in my debt, and none of us like to feel we're in debt. So gifts can work, but we have to know the recipient and have a gauge of how you think that will fit. The gift tends to have to be proportionate. You're more likely to give somebody that you love a bigger gift than somebody who just happens to be an acquaintance of, because they looked after your cat. A box of chocolates to say thanks for looking after the cat is proportionate to, here's a 2-week holiday for you and your loved one for looking after my cat. Suddenly somebody feels in debt over it. So the gift is, be careful with it. And the last one is touch. And that goes without saying that if you're in business, you can't go around just touching anybody. If you happen to be in a tactile profession, you're a dentist or you're a hairdresser or you're a doctor or something, then it makes sense that you do need to touch at some point, and it's all accepted and proportionate. But go around touching, then you're going to get yourself in a lot of bother. But that is one of the love languages. But if we take into appreciation, all 5 are valid, but the ones that will keep you safe, particularly in business, are time and verbal, and maybe a little random act of kindness, which fits under the service umbrella. So there you go. That's how you can interact both theories.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really like that. So we got appreciation, and with the rest of them, what are those?
Okay. Next one is affiliation, and that is we want to feel that we're connected, that we have a tribe. That's the way it's sort of sometimes used. That we're around people that we can trust. That we want to be around. Now, some people need 1 million followers on Instagram to feel that they're affiliated. Some people just need a couple of key friends. Again, we're all different, but we do need this feeling that we want to be connected to the right people. And if you've got a great team that you work with, there's your tribe. And the question would be, can I be myself with them? Could I tell them something and be okay with it? And I have to say, when I was working in the negotiating team, if you think of it, you've got the big part of policing, and then within there, a very small team of negotiators. And we would be on some tough calls and tough bits of work together. And I completely trusted them. I trusted them when I was on the edge of a cliff. I trusted them when I felt that I hadn't done my job right, not through bad intention, but just being human. I'd maybe come and say that was not my best day. And you could talk about it knowing that I could trust them to listen, funnily enough, and then I'd say, what's your take on it? I wouldn't mind your opinion on it, or how do we change something? And that's where actually emotional and factual language came into my own thing, was that I went to a job one day and it was a pretty significant job, and I used emotional language, and this guy erupted at me, and using emotional language for him made him feel small, made him feel pink and fluffy, whereas I needed to use factual language with him. And that was a big learning point. And I remember I had to swap over. I'd lost that negotiation. I'd lost credibility with him. And I remember the debrief, and I was just saying, I don't think this was my best day. And how come that happened? And we had a chat around it, and I thought, well, what did I learn from that? Which is, from now on, I'll go straight in with factual language until I know differently. I had a team around me that I could be myself and be completely vulnerable with, and that was my affiliation. Now, not everybody has that. Affiliation is quite often your best mate, your family, the people you trust the most. And if you're in a workplace where you just know that when you walk out the door, there's going to be bitching behind your back, you're not going to have that affiliation bucket filled.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So it's your tribe, your team, your people that you feel that you can just be.
Yeah, you can be you. And I think I really like evolutionary psychology. And obviously when we go back, if we look at psychology from an evolution standpoint, it's like, okay, well, what was a huge part of human evolution? Well, we were in tribes, and that's how we survived. Because if you were, and there's obviously so much that comes into that, the fear of rejection stems from, well, if you were rejected from your tribe and you were kind of ousted from that tribe, then you would be dead. So it's like, well, no wonder we fear it so much if we look at it from a evolution standpoint. But I find this a lot, this whole affiliation. Well, one of the businesses I have is called The Uncommon, and we're a business mastermind group. Now, we have in that a great group of business owners, and one of the key aspects of what we do, although we're a coaching business, is that we do provide a community, and it's people that they finally feel understood. They finally feel like the people that get them, and it's their tribe. And I think already we've got two things. Okay, we need to feel a sense of appreciation. We need to feel some form of affiliation. And like, I can already, like, it's almost warming me up when I feel those two things that you just mentioned. Life is better. I am more content. So I love the way this is going right now with these first two.
Okay, I've got 3 more for you.
Let's do it.
One I've alluded to already, and that's autonomy. We need to feel that we have freedom. That's freedom of speech, freedom to be the way that we want to be within parameters. And like the rules that you spoke about earlier on aren't rules that limit you. They're rules that help you structure your relationships and whatever else. But sometimes we get rules, and we did within policing, as you know, and sometimes the rules were so limited, and you think, how on earth can I do my job around there? And you would feel so frustrated that, God, here's a rule or a particular bit of paper. That was normal. Here's a bit of paper that you have to fill in for X, Y, Z. And you're thinking, what? It was really frustrating. But we need to feel that there are certain rules attached that we almost give agreement to. And then there's ones where you think, oh my word, they limit me. And if we go back, I know we don't like to go back to COVID, but it's probably an exceptionally good example of how globally we were suddenly stuck. We were not free to live the way we wanted to live because of this virus. And that was probably a good example of how our autonomy was compromised. But a good example would be like if my dad, he's no longer, he passed away 2 years ago, but I remember him, he was a very strong like father figure, right, growing up, and there was four of us at home, so four kids, and you could imagine, and it was a really loving environment, but if we came in, or dad came in from work and we were sitting on his seat, your butt got out the seat pretty quick. There was a sort of respect there sort of thing. But as my dad got older, he became more frail, and he actually went into the loft one day and fell out and hurt himself. And my brother started giving him a bit of a lecture and just going, Dad, you shouldn't be doing that anymore. You can't do that. You need to call me. Now, you tell me, a man who has always been the head of the house all his life, how he's going to take to, you can't do that anymore. And that was use of language. And we all felt the same. We didn't want Dad going into the loft without us. But you think then, how do I use language that says, please don't go into the loft, without making him feel he's getting told what to do? So, you know, and a bit of it, I'll tell you what we did do was we were able to say, when that Dad, going into the loft is really important, and you know, for whatever it was, golf clubs or something. Dad, I get going into the loft, but I feel an absolute rubbish son or daughter when I can't help you. I really want to help with stuff like that. I mean, I'm on a climbing wall 3 times a week. I could at least go into a loft for you, and I feel a rubbish daughter, as if I'm useless when you feel you have to do that yourself. And still flipped it. Now you can say that's manipulative if you want, but it gave Dad the dignity of, he could still, of course you can go to the loft if you want, but actually I wouldn't mind doing it. Oh well, okay. So I don't know if that's a very good example, but
It's a perfect one.
It's the use of the language that makes people feel that they have a choice rather than that they're being cornered.
I think this here, I got that straight away. I actually think of my dad when you say that, you know, the chair in the house, and it's my dad's chair, and I would always get up. And we think this, is when I look back to my grandparents, I'm sure people listening will have this as well with grandparents as they get old and they are less able to do things. They can get pretty defensive over that, as you said, as your dad did. But I love the way you framed that, in the sense of you framed it back to something that he values, which I assume, of course, would be his kids, and making his kids feel like they were valuable and they were loved and all these things. So it's like, as soon as you reframed it as, listen, I feel like a bad daughter by not being able to do this, and you think, well, I don't want to make my daughter feel bad, so maybe I should just let her do that. Whereas if you had to do what your brother potentially done and just challenge it and say, Dad, Jesus Christ, you shouldn't be going up the law if you're too old, you're this, then what we're going to do, he's going to get defensive, he's going to get back up. Why? Because we understand that people value autonomy, that everybody values autonomy. So I think this is where we're seeing the real value of communication here, and emotional intelligence and understanding, is once we realize this, we can, because you straight away in my head, I could see that happening. I was like, oh, he's going to get annoyed because of his sense of autonomy's been removed. So you can see where the value is in this.
I mean, even if we take it into a different angle here, things like diets. When you hear people saying, oh, I'm not allowed that anymore, that is you hearing that they feel they are being stuck by a rule. Their bucket is empty and they're not going to stick by that for very long. But if they say, no, I don't eat donuts anymore, that is a choice thing. I don't eat donuts anymore in comparison to I'm not allowed that anymore. That shouts a big difference between I'm making a decision rather than I'm being told what to do. And you'll find that, oh, I'm not allowed that anymore, there'll be a negative emotion or connotation attached to that, as opposed to the powerful, no, I don't take that anymore. So again, autonomy, it's really important that we can maybe use language or create an environment that, even though you are basically encouraging someone to go down a rule, they don't feel that they're stuck by it. You know, as you know, a trainer being able to say, well, here's some options for food. What do you prefer? Are you more on this or are you more on that? You go and choose. And you know that both choices will fulfill the need for their nutritional requirements or stuff. But you can give an option one way or the other. That's fulfilling the autonomy side of it.
And it all comes down to the language, which is great of that. So we've got 3 so far: appreciation, affiliation, autonomy. What's up next?
Status. Status is that you need to know that you are noticed, that you matter. It's not for what you do, it's for who you are. That unconditional positive regard that says, actually, Connor, you are perfectly imperfect, and that's okay. Good enough is good enough. that you're, when you walk out of a room, you're missed. When you walk into a room, that you're noticed. And anyone who's ever walked into a room and has been ignored or tried to join in a new team and they're sitting on the edge of it and not being invited in will know this feeling that they don't feel that they are important. So we need to know that we matter. Now, this can grow into egos. We are well aware around the world of people who need to feel the most important, and how much they manipulate to fill their own buckets with it. So it can be ego, and all of them have got different levels of it. But in simple terms, we need to know that we matter. Today, I was running it was a sort of race come fun run type thing in my town, and all the names, the number on the chest had people's names on them, and it was great because they were getting their names shouted by complete strangers. On you go, Louise. Go for it, Stevie. And coming into the finishing line, it was the amount of people shouting their names, and you could just see them grow. Why? Because they mattered. Somebody who didn't even know them was shouting their name, and that's a little subtle thing, but so important. So yeah, you need to know that you matter, and it's not just for the stuff that you do. So there you go.
Powerful. Do you know, it's so funny you mentioned that. I remember my first ever official half marathon I'd done. It was in Belgium, of all places. And I remember running, we just crossed this bridge and we're running underneath the bridge, and there was the first point in the race, one of the first points of the race, it was maybe 10 miles in. We weren't that far from the finish line, a few miles away. And it was the first time there was a big crowd there. And I remember I was running, and I went over with a friend, and obviously not going to know anybody, you're in Belgium, and we're running up there, and somebody shouts, "Come on, Connor, let's go." And I'm like, what? No way. And obviously they'd read it from my chest, but I forgot my name was even there. And I honestly, I can even feel it now in my stomach. I felt fired up. I was like, let's go. And I picked up my pace and I went on. And as you said there, why is it? Because it came back to the core emotional concern, the fact that I want to feel some form of status, that like I matter. And even in a country where I thought people wouldn't even speak English, I felt like I mattered, which is powerful.
It is, it's good.
Yeah,
So yeah, we need to know that we matter, in simple terms. And you can think of different examples at work or at home where that bucket maybe wasn't filled properly. And then the final one is role. When we're speaking about role, you can look at it different ways. One is, what's our purpose? Our purpose each day, our purpose each month, our purpose in our life. Do we have something that we work towards? And it can also be a reputation, what we stand for. So I split them up a little bit. Think of how we feel when we have a really crazy busy day and you're pulled from pillar to post. You've got all this stuff, and then you never get done what you wanted to get done. And we get that empty feeling that, oh my word, and our bucket is beginning to empty. We don't feel that we're achieving, we're working towards our goal despite best efforts. And compare that feeling to the day where you get everything ticked off your to-do list. You feel like you've got superpowers. You go home and you're like, woohoo, email cleared and all the conversations done we need to have and whatever else. Suddenly you feel on top of the world. And these goals can be like a birthday or a wedding. Imagine having something like that to work towards. It's really important that once we achieve these goals, we then have something else to work towards, even if it's just, a simple thing of staying healthy this year through the winter. It needs to be something that I'm not saying don't live in the present, because we should absolutely live in the present, but we're sort of, I think there's always a thing about looking to the future, and if we have something that we're working towards, it actually works very, very well with us.
Yeah.
The other thing in business, it can be our job description. When we're working within our job description, we can feel very content. When we have to work out with that, and it's maybe taken for granted that you now work out with your job description for no extra pay or anything else, you can imagine how frustrating that would be. And then it also comes into, what's your reputation? So if you think of what your reputation would be, Connor, amongst your clients and your colleagues, and you live up to that reputation, it makes them feel very comfortable. If you start living out with that reputation, it'll be surprise and confusion, and there'll be buckets emptying. So in summary, if we take all 5 of them, you have appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, status, and role. And every single person, just in summary, every single person on this planet wants to feel content and happy. And you can use this template of 5 things just as a quick and time efficient way of understanding other people. And in a business, if you can make all your employees buckets, top them up a little bit rather than empty them, you know that you're going to have retention of your colleagues. If you're in business and you have clients, make sure their buckets are full and they'll keep coming back. Your client retention will have no problem whatsoever. If you look at businesses that have a high client retention, the chances are their buckets are being filled by you, by the business. And it's worth saying, well, what is it we're doing and saying that meets that? Because we need to know what our best practice is that keeps our clients. If you're a business that's losing clients, then a good starter for 10 is to say, how come? What is it we're doing that empties their buckets? And it's not the be all and end all, but it's a good starter for 10. If you're looking at marketing, you can use them as a good template to start marketing. People who you know, people who you don't know, all need the core emotional concerns. And this suddenly makes it a very powerful thing. That when somebody comes to work with you or to visit you as a client for the first time, it's maybe taking a bit of bravery for them to come and speak with you, but how can you fill the buckets in a genuine and proportionate way? And that's probably quite a good question. At home and social and, friendship relationships, incredibly important as well. So there we go. I suppose going back to the very beginning is now go back to that job that you left and have a think why you left and think of it through terms of core emotional concerns. And now think of the place that your happy place is, that you like to be, and think of that in terms of core emotional concerns, and you will see how buckets are filled and emptied and what we do about it.
It's a great way to look at it. So again, appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, status, and role. It's fantastic. One of the things that you'd mentioned before was pace, pitch, and tone. What are those, and why are they important in communication?
That goes back, I suppose it links into more of what we were speaking at the beginning about the emotion of it. The pace, pitch, and tone. We used to speak about having a nighttime DJ voice, bringing the octaves down, just a nice slow pace. And it's as if your voice is like a hot chocolate. It's that approach. Question, Connor, and anyone who's listening, question, is there a voice that you know that you cannot stand because they speak too fast or they speak too high, or something that you just would switch off the TV if they were on TV because of the voice?
Absolutely.
And then have you got a voice that you really, really like, that you think, ooh, they've got my undivided attention because their voice is just so comforting? So for me, Harry Connick Jr., Bruce Willis, these sort of real slow voices, they're just really warming. So pace, pitch, and tone, really important for the approach. And also in business, that nice pace shows subliminally you're in control, you can be trusted, you're not panicky or anything else, as opposed to the And it's interesting that you bring that up because I've done, over the years, I've done a lot of podcasts, and I remember the first few, they were very chatty, a bit like this, where it's not too formal. We've got a purpose to it, but we're chatting. And there's ones where they were funny and we were chatting away, and I listened back and I thought, oh my word, I sound like my grandma on helium. I was just a right little Scottish voice came out, and it was like, oh my word. For me, it was awful to listen to. I think somebody said it was like listening to Mrs. Doubtfire, which I'll take. I'll have that one. That'll do me.
Yeah.
But the pace, pitch, and tone, and how you deliver what you're going to say directly impacts on the other person, whether they're willing to listen to you.
It's a great way to look at it. It's something I'm very aware of, especially in content and creating it. And when I do public speaking, it's always something I'm very aware of, like the pace at what I speak at, obviously the pitch, how loud it is and how quiet it is, and then because it totally changes what you're getting across. It's like we've all heard different examples of that probably before. And there are, when you were saying that, I think everybody can agree, like David Attenborough, for example, like he's perfect. His voice is sublime in terms of what he does, and it's so calm, and it just fits. It's perfectly where if I had to take his role, this young Scottish guy that doesn't really things aren't perfectly formed, then it wouldn't be anywhere near as good. Whereas David Attenborough just fits exactly what he does. Whereas if you took his role, and I don't know, maybe he was a DJ, it wouldn't be great, would it? It's obviously situational, but it's a great way to look at it. It's like, okay, based off the situation I'm in right now, what is the pace, pitch, and tone that I should be taking on? I can imagine, for example, if it's somewhere where there's potential for emotions to be high, if we go with maybe a slower pace and a bit more quiet, then it's maybe going to help bring that down. Whereas as soon as we get louder and faster, obviously the ability for that to become emotional and be misinterpreted, that would be higher. Would that be right?
Absolutely. And you can use that. You'll find that if you're just if you're being natural, when you're excited about something, it'll naturally go up and whatever else. But it's when you're trying to control how your communication is that you have to give it a little bit more thought. And yeah, being self-aware. Are you aware of how your voice sounds? We're lucky when it comes to the Celtic voices, whether that is Irish or Scottish, and also Newcastle as well. There's so many sort of bits of research done that they're very trusting and likeable voices. So we've landed a little bit lucky with our dialect as a start. And I know from my negotiations over the years that folk did like the Scottish accent. The only thing that wasn't good, and I learned this pretty early on, is when you say the word why. Why in a Scottish accent sounds more accusatory than anything else. You've got to stay well away from the why word. So there's pros and cons, but yeah, pace, pitch, and tone. It's fun to have a play around with that as well to see how it works for you.
For sure. And again, another great thing to be aware of, especially in a relationship sense, and like what is the right pace, pitch, and tone for this situation. But we touched on it very briefly there, the idea of the love languages, the 5 love languages. Now, I'm sure there's some people that maybe won't have heard of them before. I'll speak them out. I've actually loaded them up here because I can always, every time I speak about them, I always remember 4 of them and I forget the 5th. But in terms of the love languages, obviously we've got words of affirmation, we've got acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch. Those are the ways, at least the way that Gary Chapman explains it, is the way that we share emotional love, that we make somebody feel emotional love. How important do you think those things are in the sense of relationships and doing what we just said there? How important do you think love languages are?
Well, it's important in terms of we've all got a little bit of a different love language, and you might actually be showing your love and the other person's not seeing it because their love language is something different. I think that's the essence of what Gary Chapman was saying. And again, it's working out, when I would say it's part of the jigsaw puzzle. I wouldn't say it's the key thing and the most important thing ever, but it's part of the puzzle to try and understand each other. And it might be that if you, for example, your main love language is service, you get a little bit annoyed because you're the only one that takes the bins out and does the dishes and clears up and whatever else. And somebody else whose love language is gifts or verbal might not recognize that doing these things makes you feel loved. And it could be that you need to have a conversation about this is what I need in order to make myself feel connected. So it's probably a catalyst for conversation if you feel that it's worthwhile. And I wouldn't hang everything on that, but I would put a little bit of credence on it. It's worth a conversation in line with the appreciation.
Absolutely. I think because that's what it is, isn't it? It's like, how do you make somebody feel appreciated? Well, somebody is going to feel appreciated with a gift. Somebody is going to feel appreciated with an act of service. Whereas somebody, it might be like words of affirmation is definitely up there for me. I feel deeply appreciated when my girlfriend maybe says how proud she is of me or something, which again, she's incredibly good at. And for her, it is more like you said, those acts of service. So like when I maybe do something, she typically would cook meals or do dishes or whatever. But anytime I do that, she feels this great sense of love and appreciation. She feels appreciated because I've understood like what is my way of showing that to her. Because if I just do it the same way and I'd be like, okay, well, I just give her words of affirmation all the time, I'm sure she'll appreciate it. But what she would appreciate more is actually if I just done something around the house.
And it's important to say that it's called the love language, which makes it immediately think that that's a more intimate level of appreciation. But you can use the principle of that in every area of your relationships, whether it is work or social or with family, you can still use the principles of that. I did call it, I remember speaking to a group of people and I just said, look, I'm going to introduce these things, which is part of appreciation. It's known as the love language. And you just saw the guys going, whoa.
Yeah.
And that's not for work. So I thought, well, it's important to highlight that's what they're called through this chap, Gary Chapman, who's the author. But the reality is the principle of it can be used anywhere, and it's in line with the core emotional concerns of appreciation. So yeah, there we go.
Absolutely. Well, when we think of, again, specifically romantic relationships, one of the things that I've found through my experience in life so far is that first of all, communication is obviously so important. I think that's become clear from all the things we spoke about today. But one of the other aspects of that is emotional intelligence. How would you describe emotional intelligence for somebody who's maybe not quite aware of what that is? What is emotional intelligence?
Again, you can go dictionary definition, or my own take on it is just that you are open and receptive to how somebody else feels and how that shapes their behaviour, their language, their communication, and likewise with yourself, being self-aware of it. So emotional intelligence is you're aware of it, you seek it out, and then you react appropriately to it. And that sort of goes back to a lot of what we discussed at the beginning part about how people feel, and labelling it, or not being patronising when you're labelling it, and just identifying it. And it's also part of listening, demonstrating that you're listening by, recognising the emotion that's there. If you switch off to the emotion, you're missing a whole chunk of very important things. The intensity of it dictates how well somebody's going to hear you, and the actual content of it, if it's negative, tells you that their bucket's been emptied and that they need them fulfilled. If they're happy and content, you've got the buckets being filled and they're happy to be where they are and what they're doing. So listening for emotion allows you to be a better communicator and a more astute one at that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. When we'd not really touched on this, we talked a lot about, the pitch, the tone, the pace, and all of these things. But what about body language when it comes to communicating? How important is that, and what can we take from body language when we're communicating with someone?
From my experience, it's part of the puzzle, but should never ever be taken on its own right. I mean, an example would be when people say, oh, they've got their arms crossed, they must be defensive. It's rubbish. You need to park your arms someplace, and people will quite comfortably cross their arms. I would look at emotion. Emotion shines through your non-verbal communication. Okay, so when you feel a certain way, you will move a certain way, and it's quite good to be able to pick up. And if you think about the people you know the best in the world, you will know when emotion changes in them, particularly if it's a little kid. They move slightly differently. Their face changes. They'll crunch up, or if they're telling you a lie, for example, it'll be like, no, I didn't take the last biscuit. Their body language changes. So I think when you're working with somebody for a while, it's not so much what they do with their body language, it's when it changes, how fast it changes and what they change it to, as to whether they are feeling a particular way. But there is definitely a science, and there will be people that argue that it can be read in its own right, on its own. In my own experience, it's part of the jigsaw. It's where emotion presents itself, and it's one way of reading the emotion of somebody as well. So by all means, consider it, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. That would be my sort of experience and recommendation.
Yeah, I think there's a guy, I'm not sure if you ever heard of him, he's called Chase Hughes. He's an American guy, and he speaks about all the things we're speaking about today. I think hostage negotiation was kind of his background as well, communication. But he's the exact same thing as what he says, in the sense of people love to think, oh, they blinked 3 times, so this means they're lying, or this means this, or this means that. But it's just not the case. Can it give a little bit of further confirmation towards something? It's like, okay, well, their tone of voice is this way. Emotionally, I can see they're speaking about this, and then their body language is also reflecting that. So it's like, okay, well, maybe that helps to confirm it. But as you said there, I think when people think of that, it kind of leads into, it's a load of rubbish when you think of these things where it's like, okay, well, their shoulders facing this position, so it means exactly this 100% of the time, which, as you said, it just isn't the case.
It's not. I mean, there's definitely body language or non-verbal communication is definitely part of our communication, no doubt about it. And there's definitely things to be read from it. But to read and interpret it in a very strong way, I think could lead you down the wrong path. An example, if I'm working with somebody, say we're in a siege situation, and they suddenly go from being calm to breathing heavily, and you can see them moving about and getting, I can immediately tell their body language is telling me something. But I'm reading the emotions through it and say, Connor, what's changed? Something's changed. We have gone from being calm and having a conversation, and now what I'm seeing is heavy breathing, moving about the seat. Something's not sitting quite right. Talk me through that. Come on, help me. So I'll use it in these terms, but I won't say, "Oh, you're defensive because you've then done this, that, the next thing, or whatever." But I'll read it in to part. Again, if you think of communication, lots of different jigsaw pieces. It's one of the jigsaw pieces that you use in conjunction with the other stuff. Well, I'm saying you, we do, I do, that sort of thing, as opposed to one true and only piece of language to follow.
Absolutely. I think it's another useful thing. It's like, okay, we've got the core emotional concerns, which, as you said, like that is the thing we should be looking at here in terms of when we're communicating. How do we make people feel these things within the core emotional concerns: appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, status, and role? How do we really look for that and make people feel that? And then again, we're able to influence them to some degree. The pace, pitch, and tone, I think, is really useful. Being aware of love line, all these things are great, and kind of that probably stacks a little bit lower on the hierarchy in terms of body language. But as you said, very important. Is there anything else, any tools or things that stand out to you, particularly in a relationship standpoint, where like, okay, if somebody understood this about communication, it would help them communicate it better within the relationship? Is there any other things that stand out to you?
I suppose there's one thing missing that I've alluded to a few times, and that is, if you remember when I said when you're listening for the information, the facts, the stuff, the emotion, and then the other stuff that gives you a clue what's going on. So if we touch on a bit of what that other stuff is, if that's okay, Connor, then
absolutely,
that sort of round off that part quite neatly. And I suppose the summary of it is that every single person on this planet is unique. And when I'm coaching, I'll say, imagine the day you were born into this bubble, and it's a squeaky clean, transparent bubble, and you're in there, and there's not much filling it other than your existence. And then every moment of every day that you ever have fills that bubble with your experiences. And an accumulation of that, right now we're all sitting in our own bubbles, and an accumulation of that will buy into what you value in life, what you believe in, what you need, and what you want. And they're your motivators in life. And there's nothing that we do that falls out with these four things. We get up in the morning. Why? Because we want to, we need to, we believe in it, or, we value it. And it could be a combination of a number of them. We have a coffee because we value, believe, need, or want it. And some people have a coffee because they've got a fundamental need through the caffeine. Some people will have it as a value because it doesn't represent coffee, it represents time with friends. It's something different than a physiological requirement for caffeine. Some people will believe that coffee is a good idea. So I'm just giving you these as examples that your bubble and your life experience and you in amongst you, everything in there is unique to you. My one is unique to me, and we've got 8 billion people on that in that perspective. Now take that bubble and work out, well, the way that I make sense of the world is through that lens. So when I see something happening in front of me, that is through a lens that I'm familiar with, my beliefs attached to all my previous experiences. So again, if we have an example where a little kid runs into a room, I am Superman, I rule the world, and he's up over the table and spills the water and all of that sort of thing and creates mayhem, followed by a parent who comes in and says, I am so sorry. If I asked everybody in that room what just happened, when they speak factually, the little boy came in, he was dressed as Superman, he tipped over the water, he did this, parent came in, da-da-da-da-da-da. The facts would be pretty similar. But if I suddenly said, what's your thoughts on that? What's your opinion on that? That would give me an insight into their bubble and the lens that they see that through and experience it through. So you might get some people who say, what kind of parent are they? That kid just gets to run riot and I'm in here trying to learn. You might have somebody who says, I have two of them at home. I have got every sympathy for the parent, or whatever. You may get somebody saying, how exciting to see a little one with an imagination rather than sit in front of a screen. So you can see that when you ask somebody's opinion on something, they give you a lovely little window into how they tick, the things they value in life, the things they believe in, the things they need, and the things they want. So if we can listen, not only for the information and the emotion, but the clues that tell us how somebody ticks, we can then be a far more accurate communicator with them.
Fantastic.
That's just an example, but I hope that's probably enough to just let you know that everybody is unique. So if I see that happening and I get, say, frustrated, there's a kid coming in here out of control, I might get a bit angry about that, a bit annoyed about it. But actually, it's not helping anybody in communication terms. But it could be that somebody said, well, how come? What's the story behind that then? So rather than being annoyed that I'm annoyed, what I would get from a good communicator is, how come that bothered you? How come?
Fantastic.
You know, where I am, I see a little boy with an imagination and that fills me with hope for the future. But that's not the way you see it. How come? What's going on there? And you can start to try and understand. Listen to understand rather than listen to judge or give your own opinion. And even if it's something that's really horrible, and that takes you back into my old world, is why on earth would somebody do that? Well, actually, I have got no comprehension why somebody would want to be violent to do that, and that, but I have to find out. So I have to say, how come that works for you? What is it that brings to you? Let me understand it, because it doesn't make sense from my perspective, but I really want to try and understand. So coming back to your question about, you know, in a relationship, is there anything else missing that we should know about? Yes. Remember, you are both unique bubbles. There's a whole, if you're in a relationship with someone, I guarantee you there's a whole load of things in your bubbles that are similar, because that's what connects us. We connect on similarities. You will be with your partner because of the mutual things that you value, believe in, need and want. It doesn't make you the same. But actually, if you think of somebody that you are happy never to see again, you'll think about the differences between you, and that's what pushed you apart. So we have two unique bubbles that have some things in common that connect us. So when something is said or done that does not quite equate to your perspective from your lens, it is worth saying, how come? Explore it. You don't have to agree with it, but if you can understand it, you can then understand the behaviour. So appropriate curiosity, I call that, Connor. So that's probably the only thing that was missing from what we've spoken about, is be appropriately curious. If you find yourself wanting to jump on a judgment, then stop yourself, because you're just getting into conflict.
Outstanding. I would love to just go over that, and so I've written down a few notes here. I'd love to recite back to you what I learned from that, just to round this up for today. I think would be fantastic. So you'd said there, the whole goal of this, of communication, as I'd kind of touched on earlier, it's not just to be understood, but it is to understand others. Like that is the key thing here. A good communicator is somebody who seeks to understand. They listen to understand something, not just for the sake of listening. They listen to understand. And what you just explained there is that we all have our own unique bubbles based off of those things that you mentioned, our values, our beliefs, and what we need and what we want. Those things will determine how we respond to situations. For example, that spilled water from the child, somebody would say, oh, that's great, he's been active, whereas somebody would see that as, oh, he needs to be disciplined. But again, why is that? Why do they see that differently? Why do they have that different perception? Because their values, their beliefs, their needs, and their wants. So that was really what stood out to me, is like, okay, when we are really looking to understand somebody, that's what we're looking for. Like, okay, well, they've interpreted that and they've responded to that in a way that I wouldn't. But why is that? Rather than just shutting off entirely and saying they don't agree with me, we say, okay, well, it must be based off their values, beliefs, needs, and wants. Hence why you had said to ask them the question to get to the bottom of that. Would that be right? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you can explore the layers, and again, this has to be proportionate. When you explore the layers, basically, how come? What's that about? Why is that? Every time somebody opens up a little bit more, they'll give you an insight into their bubble, their perspective. And I separate them into values, beliefs, needs, wants. It's sometimes difficult to tell which is one and the other, and some of them are a combination of it. But if you just remember them as their motivators in life, that is the things that motivate them, the things that they see the world through, then that might be more helpful as well. But just try it. Anybody who's doing it, when you're doing the conversation thing to practice your listening, then just explore the layers. And when somebody says, well, I think kids should be disciplined, or what's coming behind that one? And you might find that, well, lack of discipline means that, the future's not good and whatever, or the lack of discipline is X, Y, Z. You get a whole sort of education. And what you find is we jump to conclusions based on our own bubble. And quite often we're not right. You might be, but you might not be. So be interested in somebody else.
Yes.
You fill buckets when you listen. The quickest way to fill people's core emotional concerns is to listen to understand and be genuinely interested in what they have to say, and let them know that you've picked up the key points. And that's the information, the emotion, and the bubble stuff.
And that's how we become better communicators. And of course, as we said, that's how we improve all the key aspects of our life, our relationships and everything. So amazing. That was so, I've took so many notes from that as well. And it was so good, Cathy. I really, really appreciate you sharing that with us. Obviously with your experience and everything you've done is fantastic, and to be able to have that conversation was just great. So I'm sure people took so much from that. The last thing I'll say is just that I said this to you before when I voice noted you, but a personal thank you, because for people that are listening may not know, a number of years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, of course, I'd done your course, the communication course, which was one of the first times I'd ever been around an expert, yourself, in a field, which I know will definitely kind of, you'll have thoughts about that, but it's like it changed the direction of my life. When I'm being serious, like, it really did. It changed how I understood people, and I really looked to understand people. It changed how I communicated in the sense of all the things you just taught to me, and it's been such a valuable skill for me, which of course you were like the kickstart on that. So I owe you a lot of I have a lot of gratitude, put it that way, and I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing all of your knowledge.
Oh, that is really, really kind of you. And I mean, you're filling my buckets with that. I feel appreciated, I feel a matter, I feel all of this. But I think I'm building on that, Connor. I mean, you're very welcome. It was a pleasure. And it's a delight to be able to come back and offer a podcast up with you, and which I hope will be helpful for everybody who's listened. But the reality is, communication is a skill, and if you don't use it, you won't hone it into serving you well. What you've done over the last 6 years is that you've taken it and you've made it your own. And then you've obviously, I'm not the oracle. I don't know and preach everything. I've given you a snapshot of it and maybe a stepping stone that you've then moved on and learned from other people, and as you should. And you've now got a lovely way of communication that will serve you well, both professionally and socially. And that's down to your sort of tenacity to hold on to it and make it work for you. You could easily have attended the course and then gone, okay, what do I remember from that one, and who was it that covered it? That's entirely possible, but you've not. So all credit to you for taking it that step further as well and making it work for you. So well done.
I appreciate that. Appreciate that a lot. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.